Dan, I think the two of us have been more confused by no one else than Joe.
Carlasare, you confuse the shit out of me, dude. I love you to tears. You're one of our favorite guests. We look forward to you, and I'm not just buttering your muffin unnecessarily here. We look forward to talking to you.
Although Dan has
as much as anyone
to butter muffins,
I'm
more
a
than
muffin
most.
butter. Yeah, I'm a talented muffin butter. But part of the reason we like talking to you is because you do confuse us. You're a bit of a contrarian, but yet you're a Bitcoin
confuse
bull.
myself, by the way, for the record. So,
well, then you know what? We're on the same page then.
The other thing that's confusing about you, Joe, is your motor, dude. Spectating you, you're on Twitter Spaces every goddamn time I log in. You're a lawyer by day. You are up to speed. It feels like on everything with markets. You're writing a novel.
Yeah.
I mean, Josh, it has to be cocaine. I don't
Dude,
know what else.
It's either cocaine
you
or
have a
Joe
family.
is just way more adept at Chat GPT than the most of us.
No,
because
it's
is
not.
it actually lawyering for you at this point, Joe?
Honestly, it's my biggest advantage, and also what I call a disadvantage is I sleep very little. I actually I made it a goal to try to get more sleep. It's like one New Year's resolution I'm doing terribly on. I'm doing great on everything else, but the sleep is awful, and my wife hates it because I'm like grinding away at something until 2 or 3 in the morning and waking her up when I go to bed. But other than that, I've got a lot of things under control.
Isn't that when the best ideas happen, though? When you wake up at 2:00 in the morning, you're like, wait a second, I should write this down. And then I fail to do it. And I wake up the next morning and I'm like, what was that great idea? It's like the great ideas you have when you're high, you know? Like
the stillness.
You write those down
silence,
and they're like, oh, that was stupid.
Guys, honestly, the stillness and silence of late night hours are incredible. Like they're just incredible. I mean, I feel like today we're so accustomed to the bells and the dings and the guy calling you, and you never get away from anything. And something's breaking. This suit is breaking. You can't have really deep thoughts, even with yourself, right? So like I treasure those late night hours, even though they're terrible for me because I rarely get recommended hours of sleep. I mean, literally, I do my best thinking every night between midnight and 1.
I think it's an important point, though. Everybody, you need to carve out time to think and ponder beyond just finance, life in general. For me, I think my deepest thoughts, 3 spaces during workouts, which is also an inconvenient time. I'm in the middle of a freaking 5-mile run and I have a great thought and I'm like, fuck, my phone's back at home or it's in my, that's number 1. Number 2, on walks in nature. And then 3, my go-to is fire pit out back at night. Which is the same thing because I'm up till 11 or midnight. I shouldn't be, but looking up at the stars, the stillness of the evening is one of those areas where I really get profound, get cosmic.
Ooh, Dan, I was 100% sure you were going for taking a dump on number 3, but wow.
That's where Twitter happens. That's where Twitter happens. Yeah. You run a lot. Is running an area? Are you like me, Joe, where you're in the middle of a run and something clicks?
No, because running is when I really dig into audiobooks. So I have to double time that. So I'm almost always either listening to an audiobook or a podcast when I'm running. What are your
audiobooks of choice? Is it fiction? Do you listen to what do you listen to generally?
Everything. I mean, I really think fiction's important.
So do I.
Not only because I have so much analytical material that I digest, right? Like I have to have a release in something about the Stephen King book that just came out, Fairy Tale, those sorts of things.
How many books is that guy on right now? Is he on like 55
incredible. Books?
That guy's like the most prolific author of all time.
If you count all of his novellas, I think he's over 200. And by the way, he has another one coming out next month that I've already pre-ordered. It's called Holly.
It's got to be amphetamines too, Josh. There's no other explanation.
Cocaine.
Yeah.
No, it's incredible how much you can achieve if you're always doing something, right? And like I constantly I'm actually trained myself like at this point where I get very upset and nervous like when I'm not doing something productive.
Yeah.
My wife says I can't relax. Like she's like, you're always talking to somebody, you're always writing something, you're always reading something. You need to relax. And she's right? So that's like why I gravitate to those early morning hours, midnight to 2 a.m. But honestly, like I feel if you do it enough and you're constantly busy, and like in my line of work, guys, I have to account for every 10th of a minute, right? I bill, right? So to me, I got so good at like getting my billable hours done so that I have additional time to devote to my other resources, it all spiraled into all these other areas where I'm like, now I just always am reading something, writing something, doing something, talking. I'm not saying it's good way to live, but it definitely makes you productive. Talk to us about this novel you're writing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I can't go too far into that, because I'm going to save it. But it's loosely inspired by some elements of Bitcoin in cases that I've had, legal cases. It's a legal thriller. I am not the protagonist. I'm not cool enough to be the protagonist. But
his name is Joe. Yeah. Lawyer out of Chicago.
Yeah, there's more of a traditional type, legal protagonist that is mixed and matched into some real sticky situation, and at the core of it is Bitcoin. I think people are going to read it, and my goal is this: my goal is that people enjoy a good story, like a solid story with good character development. I mean, obviously, there's a great character arc for the people I put in there. But beyond that, what I want people to take away from it is I want them to sort of understand some things about Bitcoin you don't get through the popular culture, right? All you hear about is price, right? You don't hear about how Bitcoin is stored. You don't hear about how it's sent. You don't hear about private public key management. All these really intricate things that we geek out about in Bitcoin spaces and on Twitter about, I want them to actually play a role in a narrative.
Have you written another book, or no? Is this your first book? I mean, I'm saying even just for fun, not published. Have you tried other ideas, or is this?
I have tried other ideas. I mean, I was writing short stories and stuff going back to grade school, but nothing that I'm proud of. Or this one, I will get published, right? I mean, that's the kind of intensity I'm approaching it with.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about it, and I'm excited because I don't think there's any real. I was talking with American Hodl about this. There's no real good. I mean, even if you throw in crypto, there's no real good crypto movies, stories, fiction out there, right? There's nothing. There's that really.
Hopefully, somebody makes an SBF movie.
I'm sure there will be
something on that. Yeah,
I have a buddy actually who's a screenwriter. He just wrote and directed a film. It's going to be out. It's called Pools. His name is Sam Hayes. He's one of my best friends. Roomed with him in college. Him and I have been talking for couple years about the idea of him writing a Bitcoin screenplay, and he texted me about a month ago, and then I saw him on a trip, and he's seriously considering embarking on that project. So shout out to Sam. Hopefully that gets off the ground, and we'll update if that's the case, because there's a real void of content in a space that could really use it. You have an immediate captive audience if you do it right and you do it thoroughly.
And Bitcoin's money, right? So how many interesting thriller ideas could you have where money is the goal, right? Heist movies, all these different things. With Bitcoin, I mean, I think it's kind of weird that there hasn't been more.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
The guy who lost the laptop with 100,000 Bitcoins on it. I mean, that's gotta be, I don't think his story's ended yet. He's probably still jigging through that dump site himself. But when he does end up, offing himself afterwards, there'll be a good movie about it.
Josh, I'm almost afraid to box in a wild animal like Carlasare with a question off the top. Should we let's just throw it to you, Joe? What's on your mind today? How do you want to start this conversation, and then we'll go from there?
So I think you have to start the conversation with what's going on in the economy. I mean, and as much as I'm passionate about Bitcoin, right? I love Bitcoin, but I always have to step back and say, okay, here's where Bitcoin fits into the broader macro picture, right? And that's important because my belief in Bitcoin is continually confirmed by the mess that's going on in the macro picture. I have very different views, as you know, than many of the macro Bitcoin people, which is fine. We have great spirited debates. But the notion now that we're sitting here in 2023 and you're sitting with rates, bearing down on 6% or within an earshot of 6% in the Fed funds rate, and you just saw a massive jump in tax receipts today. I mean, then you saw some economic data for the last couple of weeks that is continuing to be strong and robust. I think it would completely confound people. If we were on this podcast last year when we were talking with Greg or whatever, right, and I were to tell you, nope, the economy will be cruising along. We'll still have secular lows in unemployment. We'll still have a real estate market that is frozen, but
Very
obviously
few would have
prices. prices are crazy.
Right.
You'll have the stock market will be within 5% of the all-time high. And by the way, you'll have Jerome Powell saying that he's not going to cut rates for 2 years. I mean, it would be awesome to go back in time, right? Because like I remember being in these spaces and really smart people, like I remember vividly talking with Lynn Alden, and she was asked a question: "Do you think the Fed can raise rates?" And her response was, "No, not for any significant period of time." Well, they're over a year now, right? And if they hold them there, as they say, for another 2 years, does that qualify as a significant period of time? And you have to wonder why. And we can, as detectives, right? Like when you're analyzing this data, you shouldn't get tied into these narratives or tropes about here's how this works or here's how this, and every time the Fed raises, things blow up. You have to really approach it like a detective. You can have a hypothesis, you could have a theory or a prime suspect, but you got to finally dig under the hood and figure out what's going on. And I think that I'm continually trying to, get closer and closer to what's really going on. That's what I want to talk with you guys about on this program. So do I have the ability here to like share charts? Is that like something that
you can, but we've had issues with that in the past, but
is that not going to work?
I say send it and we'll try to sort it out.
You see the share button down there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
I'm going to try just for this one.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Right. Okay. Let's see.
While you're pulling that up,
it is.
I continue to go back to just the age-old adage: more money is lost preparing for bear markets than actually in them.
Right.
And, then there's a ton of truth to that over the last couple of years. It's like, but no, just wait. And the timeline keeps moving out. It's like, oh, it's going to be next quarter. No, it's going to be next quarter. No, it's going to be next quarter, assuredly. Well, it's still not coming.
Guys, I've sat through major bear market drawdowns, right? Like I've sat through, huge, terrible, gut-wrenching movements downward in Bitcoin. And at the same time, I focus a lot on like the macro data, right? And people ask me all the time, well, why are you spending all this time on the macro data if you're not going to sell Bitcoin, if you're not going to try to trade the market, if you're not going to, time it? And the reason is, it's not because like I'm trying to look for a trading edge, right? Like I do some limited trading here on certain macro assets, but that's more of like, for fun. That's like 5% of my portfolio. The vast majority of my stuff, both stocks and Bitcoin, is long-term hold positions. The reason I focus all on the macro information because I want to know how close we are on the progression towards a movement towards Bitcoin. It isn't because I'm trying to time and double my stack or things like that. It's because I want to figure out like, okay, is this really significant? Is like, remember we were talking about the banking crisis back in March, right? I was looking at it objectively, and while it appeared scary at the time, right? I think like there was plenty of evidence to suggest it was a tempest in a teapot. It wasn't necessarily going to spill over and move to the Balaji route of collapsing the entire banking system. There's just you didn't see those issues systemic throughout the entire banking system. But
hey,
anyway.
Joe, before this chart, I want to just ask you a simple question. Warren Buffett has said over and over again, he doesn't worry about macro. He worries about, the specific companies, the moat that they're creating. And that's why his basic thesis is that macro is just so difficult and so hard to wrap your arms around. It's so complex and nobody ever really gets it right. And the more I kind of watch from my perspective, I tend to think, as much as this sacrilege to agree with Buffett in Bitcoin, he seems to be right largely about macro. It's just so difficult to it's almost like weather predicting a year out. There's so many variables in that.
Folks, we're going to take a moment here to announce our newest partner here at Blue Collar Bitcoin, and that is Heatbit. Josh and myself, Dan, found this product at Bitcoin 2023, and it immediately stood out to the two of us. Heatbit makes a badass 3-in-1 device. It's a Bitcoin miner, a heater, and an air purifier all in one. This puppy uses the same amount of energy as any regular heater, and it generates $20 to $25 worth of Bitcoin every month you use it. It's incredibly aesthetically pleasing. Dare we say sexy. It uses cutting-edge tech with 5-nanometer mining chips, and it's compact and quiet. To top it off, the price point is beyond accessible, starting at just $299. Earn passive income in Bitcoin while heating and purifying your home, and control the entire thing from a sleek and easy-to-use app. Go to heatbit.com, that's heatbit.com, and start hashing at home.
How do you? What's your approach to that?
I would qualify it like this: when Warren Buffett says he's not focused on macro, he's not buying companies and trading companies based on macro. Okay, that's a big difference, and people get really confused. And this is one thing I rail against, like when you got the people that are on these spaces talking about the end of the world and the collapse of Western civilization, right? Because people hear that and implicitly they think, I need to sell stocks. I need to sell my portfolio. I need to sell my house. I need to be in gold in a bunker with a gun and whiskey, and that's my only chance. Like,
don't forget cigarettes.
Oh, yeah, right, and cigarettes. So to me, like that kind of narrative, I think is very it hurts a lot of people. It really does, because it dissuades them from buying Bitcoin at much cheaper levels. It dissuaded them from buying last fall because people were talking about the end of the world. It encourages people, I think, to think in a short-sighted manner. When at the end of the day, even if things get bad from here, there's going to be something on the other end, and you should be positioned for that, and you shouldn't try to time it.
Well, it's also a fatalistic, nihilistic approach more broadly. Like, you should not be rooting against the major societal organization strategies. We don't want global poverty. We don't want rampant suffering. I mean, this is said in Bitcoin all the time, but it should be reiterated. I mean, you don't want to wish for the implosion of global financial markets. Yeah, and anyone that does, I don't think understands how big of a deal that would be and how painful and sad that would be for humanity.
Correct. I mean, and the thing that kind of sets me off, if there's one thing, is that I have members of my family, I've talked about this before, like, you know, they were convinced by the gold bugs, and now they're living in, a much more impoverished retirement because they put all their money in gold and were afraid of the stock market. They've been hearing about like how sound money is going to take over everything and fiat will collapse for 30, 40 years. So to me, like, you know, those kind of messages we really have to temper as Bitcoiners. But yeah, the one thing I'll just say is that macro is really important. You shouldn't discount it for understanding the world we're living in. Things like demographic trends, things like where, you know, how populations are moving, the over indebtedness and pressure that's going to put in certain markets moving forward. But macro cannot be utilized for trading in the short run. And it's a very simple reason why, because markets are dynamic systems. They're not linear. It's not as simple as Fed raises interest rates, markets crash. It's not that simple. If that were true, then every single person could just follow a very simple rubric and make a lot of money in markets. But as you can see, in certain dynamics, when people think the boat's all going to go one way, it actually flips the other way. Yes. Because how people get positioned moves it. It's a dynamic system. It's not one that's perfectly linear and responsive to variables on the macro front.
One more thing, Joe. We'll get to your chart, I promise. What you just said, I could imagine somebody sitting here, let's say this is the first podcast they're listening to that has to do with Bitcoin. Maybe they were interested in gold and they see these two things as very similar assets. So they hear you saying or denigrating gold as like that was a bad idea 10 years ago, but Bitcoin is somehow a better idea, even though these two assets are viewed very similarly. So how would you explain that to that person thinking like, why is Bitcoin the better idea at this point than gold was 10 years ago? And how can you be so sure of that?
Very sure of it and very confident of it, because Bitcoin is far more than the asset itself. Bitcoin is a network. It's a monetary network that will eventually supplant to the entire global financial system. And gold is not. Gold is a rock, right? Gold is an element on the periodic table. Gold is something that fails in the network that we need for 21st century commerce over the internet. And for people to reduce and denigrate Bitcoin to digital gold, to me, Josh, that's offensive. Like I think like when I hear digital gold, that's what Bitcoin. I'm like I want to sell my Bitcoin, because there's people that do not understand what Bitcoin is. It is not a shiny yellow rock. That's not what it is.
I think it's a very useful tool to help people, to introduce people to it, to help them understand what, at least at a very limited level, this is. I think that's a good introduction for people. And all I'm saying is, I'm certainly not making that argument. I'm simply bringing that up to say, if somebody's listening to this and they had that idea that gold was great and they maybe don't think so 12 years later, and now they're hearing about Bitcoin, it sounds like a parallel idea in a lot of ways to a lot of people. Yeah. That's the only reason I brought that up, because I think it can cause some confusion.
I mean, I don't understand how a generation that grew up seeing the promise and innovation of the internet would not just use the internet. I mean, literally, Andreas Antonopoulos did the work for Bitcoiners, the Internet of Money, like what is it, 7 years ago, 6 years ago?
Got it behind me. That's like that. That's literally what did it
I mean,
for me. That's what pushed me over the edge.
So you're telling me, Josh, that talking to a regular person, you're going to say, hey, I know you don't own any of the shiny yellow rock, but you should buy it because it's now going to work in a digital era. Instead of saying, this is the internet for things of value. This is how we're going to communicate value among people. You don't think that that's more persuasive to the regular people, that this is how we will communicate and share our experience and share our time, show what is valuable in society? And by the way, I firmly believe it's not going to be solely about money. I think Bitcoin's global network will serve other purposes that we haven't yet scratched the surface of. So to me, it's a minimalistic, overly simplistic. Totally,
but I'm just saying, I think that to a lot of the uninitiated who don't understand network effects, who don't understand a whole lot of the terms you might be using there, that just there's a lot of people that still don't get that stuff.
Yeah.
So
right.
I think that as an introduction,
you got to find a hook somewhere. You got to find a hook somewhere. And then
what was the hook for the internet? What was the hook for the internet?
I mean, nobody figured that out for 20 years. It was like 5 years ago when people really figured that out, at least the general public.
It's going to take 20 years for Bitcoin. It's going to take 30 years. I mean, it's even more complex.
What he's saying is that calling Bitcoin digital gold is objectifying Bitcoin. There's so much more to it. It's like me saying your wife is hot and nothing else, Josh. And you're sitting there going, no, she's got so much to offer on the inside. She's such a great mother. And I go, no, she's just hot. That's what we do when we call Bitcoin digital gold. There's so much more depth there.
What if I
just like objectifying Bitcoin?
What if I walked up to you and I said, oh, this is like the internet's like a message board. That's what it is. It's a message board. I'm like, is that going to, why do I need that? What's the point of that? I call people on the telephone. That's how I communicate with them. I give them a ring. I mean, it's such a reductionist way of talking about something that's profound. And I don't want to make it overly simplistic. I'm going to explain how this thing is going to change the world. And for you to understand how it's changing the world, you have to put in a little effort. I can't just say it's a yellow rock.
Yeah, and much the same. Okay, so back to your fair point about the internet. What was the hook for the internet? We really had nothing to latch onto. There was really no handle. The thing was just so useful and so effective.
What is it is it the Today Show, the one where he's like, "What's that @ sign? What is an internet?" Explain that. Is it Katie Couric and Kirk? I mean, that's kind of the same discussions we have about Bitcoin, and I'm sure you guys have had firehouse discussions about this. Like, explain to me what this is. Why do we? Well, you got to put in a little work. It's a little complicated, guys. I mean, I can tell you certain elements of it, but today I learned something new about Bitcoin I've never learned before, right? Like, and I mean that I've been involved in Bitcoin for years now, and that's just how it is. I mean, it's just the you got to start from that premise.
All right, so what's this chart we got up here?
Okay, sorry, we got way off, and I apologize. So, so we started with the idea. So just to reset, we started, guys, with the idea of like, why isn't the economy responding? Why do you have these markets floating towards all-time highs? And I don't know if you could see this, but I think this is a great illustration. So what you can see here in the red line, and it's really stunning here. This is U.S. non-financial corporate net interest costs. Okay. Net interest costs. So let's break down what that means. So you're taking out financials. You're using corporate net interest costs, meaning the amount they have to pay to finance their debts, right? The amount they've taken out. So let's just figure this out. What has happened in the past when the Fed, and by the way, this black line, you see this for the folks that are listening, I guess not can't see the graphic. There's a black line in the bottom that says the Fed funds rate, and then there's the net corporate net interest cost. And what you've seen during prior hiking cycles, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but for example, you're looking at prior hiking cycles leading up to 2006, for example, is that when the Fed started to hike, you saw the corporate net interest cost, meaning the cost of holding that debt, start to skyrocket. So what does that do? What does that do? From a practical standpoint, guys, what this means is that corporations that took out money are responding very quickly when they took out loans, responding really quickly to raises in interest rates. And you see this through several past cycles going back to, the 90s, actually, even into the 80s. And what you're seeing, why this time is actually different, is you see this rapid rise in the Fed funds rate here at the end, but you see net interest costs start to go down. So why is that? The answer is because companies which everybody is they're constantly parroting. There's so much corporate debt. There's so much consumer debt. There's so much debt all over the place. Well, yes, that is true. However, many of those debts were taken out at very low interest rates. Companies were filled to the gills with cheap money in 2020, 2021, when the rates were near zero, and they were like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Effectively, they took out as much as they can, and that's consumers too, right? You're talking about almost 70% of all mortgages in existence right now are under 4%. So the Fed can hike to 20%, but in the short run, until companies have to roll this paper and have to actually extend out the maturities, they're not affected. Their bottom lines aren't affected. Again, this is net interest costs. So this directly eats into their bottom line. This is what's going to trigger unemployment to rise, all these issues that we talk about. But the problem that many macro analysts, and I don't pretend to be a macro analyst, but I'll just tell you my perspective. I think many folks missed this, myself included, last year, how much cheap debt had been taken out at very low interest rates when the Fed was beginning this hiking cycle, and they equated it to prior hiking cycles where you see this little run up right here, where you see very instantly corporates respond very quickly whenever there's a hike. So this is the story right here. And by the way, this is not just a story in the corporate. I mean, I'll stop sharing this just so we could talk more. But this is not just about corporate.
I'm going to pull up just the fiscal side here while you keep talking.
Yeah, this is not just corporates, right? This is also individuals. Unlike, you guys remember I'm sure you've seen The Big Short, right? Everybody's seen The Big Short. Do you remember how many people took out adjustable rate mortgages, right? A lot of those consumers and investors and folks that were speculating in real estate, they learned their lesson. They actually put out a lot fewer arms into the space right now. They got fixed low rates, 2%, yes. Right? And by the way, now that those rates are 2%, not only are they more profitable, but because inflation is the big boogeyman, they have a very easy justification to go to all their tenants on their speculative real estate properties and say, we're going to raise your rent. And then all those employees have a very easy basis to go to their employer and say, hey, I need more money because inflation's running at 8 or 9%. And you don't have something systemically breaking among the American consumer. Now, where do you have pressure? You have pressure in the banking system, right? Because the banks who have to hold this paper, they're the ones who ultimately have to, somehow deal with the fact that their paper that was worth, 50% more is now declined rapidly in value on a mark-to-market basis because of the rapid hike in interest rates. However, what the Fed has said is like, look, we're going to keep a general policy with respect to interest rates. We're going to say we're going to pedal to the metal. No cuts for 2 years is what Powell just said. At the same time, the weakest players in the system who are holding money good treasuries, we are going to support them where necessary through surgical approaches like the BTFP. And by the way, just to conclude here, this is exactly what the Fed governors were saying last fall. If people were going to listen to it, there's a famous quote that I've posted about 1 billion times on Twitter where, I think it's Christopher Waller says, look, there's this notion now that financial stability concerns will cause us to not want to hike further. And we disagree. We think there are specific targeted programs that can deal with any issues of financial stability, and we can still keep pedal to the metal with respect to interest rates.
So your main overarching point from the chart you shared is that corporates in the private sector are far less pinched than some might imagine with rates hiking because their net interest payments are down. To flip to the fiscal side, back to a popular Bitcoin chart, which I'm curious to see how much you think it matters. Look at what I have up here. Very popular to talk about, the fiscal situation and interest payments for the government approaching $1 trillion and blah, blah, blah. What do you make of the significance of this in terms of hiking?
Well, I mean, the fact that interest rates are accelerating and, and you're going to have structural deficits, I think is baked in and known. I don't think it's something that in the short term should cause a panic in the market. There's, been numerous auctions in recent weeks that have gone very well for the Treasury. They can still borrow, at rates, particularly at the long end that are, 4% under, 100 basis points or more under Fed funds. So, the notion that the government has some inability to finance its debt in the short run is, I think, misguided. But I will say that, over the long run, obviously structural deficits are a real problem. But, that doesn't tell you much in terms of investing, for the next 12 to 24 months.
Right.
I will just say one thing. when I'm focusing on, those charts about the net interest payments and the corporate payments, right? There is a limit to that. And the limit is actually when that paper has to get rolled. And if you actually study when there's maturities coming to market on junk paper, particularly in a lot of these zombie companies, the time frame seems to line up mid-2024, and then it accelerates through 2025. So there are trillions of dollars that will have to be rolled at much higher interest rates. And if the Fed is to thread the needle, okay, what needs to occur is you need to see inflation come down very quickly so that they can actually start to ease the pressure going into the middle part of next year. And that's them threading the needle effectively. They have to say, like, okay, now that you have to finally roll this paper and there's going to be tremendous stress in the market, we need to sort of ease up so we can make it a little bit more accommodative. But you got to remember, the Fed's policy right now says that rates are restrictive. Okay, restrictive meaning above the natural rate of inflation. And this is something that's not understood, and Bitcoin Twitter and many even FinTwit spaces. But our society has a natural rate of inflation built into it. It's called R star, based on the demographics and the debt. And R star right now, by some calculations, is 100 to 150 bips below where Fed funds is, meaning that Powell has raised the rates to a restrictive level to cool off inflation. And the idea is that hopefully we can, by the time inflation is cooled off and we have to roll that bad paper, that junk paper, we can get rates back down.
There's a pretty big contingent out there that believe that this is going to kind of yo-yo back in, maybe not to the extreme that something like Weimar Germany did back in the 20s, where they accommodated and then they tightened, and then you had asset prices like gold just doing these crazy volatile moves during that decade. Do you see this? Do you think that's a possibility, maybe a much more muted level, or do you think they actually have this thing under control at this point?
No, I think it's absolutely a possibility. And this is one of the things where I noted, we were going to talk about certain things, and like there's going to be some discussion about, is the bottom end in Bitcoin, is the bottom end on stocks, is the top end, and where are we going 100K next? Like any of those sort of things I think are kind of silly, right? Like they're like, so tomorrow, if UBI is introduced in the United States, right, what's the price of Bitcoin going to be?
Yeah.
I mean, conversely, if there is systemic risks in the treasury market tomorrow, what do you think the price of Bitcoin is going to be? I mean, like there's way too many variables, as I said, in a complex and dynamic system. And when we attempt to reduce them to, always buy at the, the 20-week moving monkey, that'll always be good for Bitcoin. I mean, so it's silly.
What you're saying is macro is just too complicated to really plot out?
No, it's not too complicated to plot out. It's too complicated to trade off of. There's a difference.
I know.
Trade off of.
I had to get that dig in there.
Yeah. No, I think you're wise though, because what comes through in your tone and your thoughts is that it sets timelines. It changes perspectives on what might, like, for example, back to the recession thing. I mean, everybody's quoting the same stuff: PMI, shipping rates, commodity index, yield curve. Everyone's saying the recession's coming, and you're sitting there going, "I'm not so sure." And I think it's helpful. I think that's helpful, because back to the main point of it is wildly unpredictable, and everyone's kind of predicting the same thing. And especially when some of the data, which you've brought up already, and some of the momentum is moving in a different direction than everyone expected last year, it does make you sit back and scratch your head and rethink, instead of just regurgitating the same line of "it's coming next quarter" or the quarter after. I'm guessing overarchingly you are cautioning people against assuming that a recession is looming. Is that an accurate?
Absolutely. So, and I'll tell you why. I think I'm cautioning that. Well, let me rephrase. I do believe that we're on our way to a recession. However, I think it can be a lot more drawn out, the lead up. Like, okay, they talk about the hard soft landing. Like we could be in the air for 4 or 5 more quarters before recession hits. And in that environment, right? Like, I'm not shorting Bitcoin or shorting stocks like that. I mean, that's silly, right? I think there will be clear indications, and I'll pull up one more. I apologize, but this is really kind of, if I had to pick, I picked the top 2 I wanted to show you in the way of charts here.
Keep slinging.
Yeah. So this is the one other one I wanted you to see, and this is the lending standard. So to me, and this is again one thing where I look at the world just respectfully in a very different way. from I think many in our space, which is fine. Again, because I can be wrong, right? I don't have a monopoly on the truth,
and so can they. That's why we love your takes.
I'm just saying, from my perspective, I think what I look at the world as, I look at the world not in the context of what is the central bank doing. I look at it in the context of what are commercial banks doing, because I think commercial banks create the majority of money out of thin air at a whim without any sort of direct control from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve can cut rates to 0. They can jack it up to 15%. In many ways, all that will decide whether banks want to continue to lend is the bank's decisions themselves. So one of the things that I study and always eagerly look at is something called the Senior Loan Officer Survey. Are you guys familiar with that at all? Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay.
It would be helpful too if send us if you can send us an email. I'd love to of just where you find these charts. I'm not familiar with where do you dig this stuff up?
Joe's really it's coming from 18,000 different places.
It's coming from a lot of places, and unfortunately,
if you don't mind, you just detail that.
Joe,
long
Joe, let us latch onto your teat, please. I'll take the left, Josh. I'll take the right. Seems like some decent, occasionally sour, but mostly good milk, right, Josh?
You got to be careful you find the right teat. You don't want to hit the wrong one.
Who's the run? That's the question out of the two of us.
Can you guys see this one?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one's a real fun one. So let me just explain this again. So on the top of there's a line graph that's basically a green line, and it describes when it's from the Senior Loan Officer Survey, right? It's basically taking data that is polling data, right? Survey data of loan officers. And it is showing when they are loosening or tightening their lending standards. So as you can see, the tightening begins generally at like the blue dots right there. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of peaks around the red dots.
Okay. And
what you can see, at least it's clear to me, and you can go all the way to 2019, COVID, right? You generally see that there's a tightening of lending standards, and then there's a rise in unemployment, right? Because that is actually cutting off access to capital to the private sector, to companies, right? Companies that want to keep their employees hired, they are told, we are going to be a little bit more cautious. The banks are going to be cautious in terms of what we're just letting out there. It's not a endless punch bowl. We're in certain environments. We're going to be careful about who we're lending to. So why is that relevant? Why is this the chart I picked out to show you guys? By the way,
if you're not looking on YouTube, the correlation in this chart is sort of jaw dropping, in my opinion. It's crazy.
And it's not just correlation, right? It's a leading indicator, right? Once the lending standards, as you pointed out there, Dan, the lending standards start to rise, unemployment generally starts to tick up as well, right? So what do we see here? So we see most recently, and you actually saw prior to COVID, you saw the lending standards begin to rise. This was coincident to the yield curve inverting in late 2018, the blow up in the repo market, stresses in the system generally, and the widespread view in late 2019, if you were following the markets, that we were headed towards recession. And then what do you see? Then you see the stimulus money come in after COVID. You see 0% rates. You see banks that are pushed, have tons of liquidity on their balance sheets, eager and willing to lend. And you see then not only the standards drop like a rock, right, into 2021, where anybody, if they have a pulse, can get a mortgage. But in addition, you see an unemployment drop as well. So where are we at right now? You have structurally low unemployment. You have lending standards that have tightened precipitously in the last few months, and we just got more data showing they're tightening further. And again, maybe this time's different.
What's coming next?
Yes, it's coming next. But here's the key thing, though. These standards really didn't start to get tight until Q1, Q2 of this year. So if you're measuring sort of the lag effect that we see in past occasions, right, that puts you into 2024. Into 2020, and that coupled with the amount of stimulus still in the system, I mean, to me, it's something where I think everybody's been messed up on the timing, and everybody was messed up because of a trope, right? They were messed up because we got this idea in our head that the only reason stocks and Bitcoin and all these assets go up is because of low interest rates. And I totally reject that because of the chart I showed you first, right? Which is the fact that it's not about the interest rates. It's about companies and how companies have to service their debts. Okay. And as long as companies have low interest rates because they fixed it through earlier loans that were originated, they're fine. Yeah. You know, you could raise interest rates to 12% tomorrow. Josh, does your mortgage go up? Is your mortgage affected?
Not one bit.
Is your credit card affected?
My credit card probably is. I've noticed the rate's gone up to like 25%, but but
you pay it off every month.
Pay it off,
right? Yeah. And a lot of consumers are like that. They have job security, like they think they have job security. They've got, low fixed debts. They've got, some have home equity loans which were at 2%. They're flush with cash, and they've got assets that are really at high levels, right? So the asset themselves, that improves liquidity. When you have stocks at all-time highs and you have a significant stock portfolio, you feel pretty good. You can borrow against it. You are awash in liquidity. Until you have a liquidity tightening, a real liquidity tightening, you cannot, in my opinion, have a recession.
Do you think that is also true? Does that follow and ring true for real estate right now as well? Because a lot of people have called like commercial real estate. Obviously, everyone thinks, oh shit, this is going to hit the fan. I don't, operate in those waters, so I don't have any idea besides the fact that I see a lot of open commercial real estate. I don't know how that's moving. But as far as homes are concerned, I've noticed in my neighborhood, houses are starting to drop. Like I've noticed one across the street from me just went for sale like a month ago. I think they dropped it by like 40,000 at this point, and now they took it off the market because they can't sell it. They need to do some repairs or whatever. But I'm noticing, at least in my little fishbowl that I'm in right now, that things don't seem to be moving quite as quickly as they were. At least it seems to be a stalemate.
Yes. Brilliant. That is exactly what it is. I would describe it as a frozen market. It's a frozen market for several reasons. Number one, it's frozen because the vast majority of holders of real estate, whether there's, basically even commercial holdings, they're fixed at low interest rates, like we talked about earlier, right? So for them to sell a piece of property, not only are they going to have to sell it likely for a fire sale, right? But in addition to that, they're going to have to give up a 2 or 3 or 3.5% mortgage. Yeah. And right now we have a structural shortage in the housing market where the only transactions that are occurring are people that have to buy houses. They're relocating for very specific reasons, for work, whatever. So they basically have to pay whatever the marginal rate is. They don't really have a choice. 7% mortgage, you're paying extreme high prices. And those, I feel really bad for those people because they're just, if I had to move, I would be so angry because you don't have an option, right? You're forced to bid up because there's just limited supply. One crazy statistic, right? There are currently more real estate agents in the United States than available supplies of homes. There is not enough homes in the United States for every real estate agent to list one of them.
I wonder how that chart's going to correct.
I mean, it will correct when people are forced to sell. And why are people forced to sell? People are forced to sell. If you go to the National Association of Realtors, the number two reason people sell houses, death is number one. Number two is they lose their job.
Yep.
So what do we have here? We have an entire population that the baby boomer population that is aging, that is going to need to downsize. They don't have a choice. They don't want to do it now, but they will eventually be forced to over the next several years. So I'm very bearish on real estate generally over the next, not just quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarter, like 3 to 5 years. Like in general, I think real estate's really going to struggle. But beyond that, okay, I will tell you that you're going to have a whole group of people, if the Fed gets their way, which their stated goal, guys, and this is so critical for people to understand, is to get unemployment higher. They want people out of a job. Jerome Powell, when he says the labor market's out of balance, what he's saying is effectively, I want more unemployed people because I don't want a wage price spiral. I don't want more demand for labor.
Howdy, plebs. It is Dan here. I want to take a minute to talk to you about Crowd Health. What Crowd Health is doing in the healthcare space is nothing short of remarkable. If you're already familiar with Crowd Health, you can visit joincrowdhealth.com/BCB and use code BLUE for a tantalizing 3-month trial discount. As you probably know by now, the two of us are career firefighter paramedics. Nearly 70% of our calls are medical related, and we both rotate over to an ambulance. We're the first link in the chain in the healthcare system, and we see just how broken it is. Injured and sick patients stressed out of their mind, primarily worried about the incoming hospital bill. Crowd Health offers an extremely simplistic and workable alternative to traditional healthcare setups for a freaking fraction of typical premiums. It's essentially the decentralization of healthcare, leveraging the power of Bitcoin alongside healthcare crowdfunding to drastically uncomplicate healthcare and give back control to patients. Crowd Health negotiates bills for their members and finds them the best doctors and hospitals. Do yourself a favor. Visit joincrowdhealth.com/BCB. That's joincrowdhealth.com/BCB. And use code BLUE during sign up to receive a max discount crowdfunding request of $49 a month. Yes, $49 for the first 3 months. The Blue Collar Bitcoin podcast is brought to you by arguably the most legendary company in Bitcoin, CoinKite. They are the producers of the renowned Cold Card, the world's most trusted and secure Bitcoin signing device, built with a plethora of features fit for Bitcoin beginners all the way up to the most advanced of users. This device is a one-stop shop for your Bitcoin custody needs, and something the two of us have trusted for years. CoinKite also manufactures the Block Lock, a gorgeous e-ink digital display art piece sitting in the background of what seems to be every serious Bitcoiner on the planet. Block Lock can be programmed to scroll through key Bitcoin metrics, including price, hash rate, next halving date, and much more. Boy, oh boy, will this thing look good in your living room or office. They are also the makers of many other security and fun products for all users, no matter their technical aptitude. Support our show and get a delicious discount on CoinKite products by following our affiliate link on the screen and in the notes, and using code BCB for 5% off the Cold Card. Yeah, wow, it's crazy. I mean, that it makes sense, but it is wild to play that out. And we've said it twice already, but just look at your own behavior, look at your own incentives. For me and my family to leave a house that we bought in 2018, it would take something incredibly dramatic, i.e. unemployment. Nobody is going anywhere. Supply is going to stay incredibly low until people are forced out.
Yeah.
And
so if you're looking at like, okay, what are some things rather than just sticking to narratives about, the world's going to collapse tomorrow? What are the signs of what you want to see? Number one, like focus on initial claims. Like initial claims are really key. If you see unemployment start to rise, that means we're on the doorstep of a recession. We haven't seen it yet. So like last year, I was looking at the secular lows in unemployment. I was saying, what are these guys talking about with a recession? You go try to hire somebody, particularly low-end jobs. You can't. Every place I went to with my wife for dinner, like help wanted, help wanted. That's not a recession. What kind of recession occurs when there's a desperate need for labor? Recession, like the old adage, recession's when your neighbor loses your job, or depression's when you lose your job. Without unemployment rising precipitously, you can't really have a real nasty, bad recession.
Yeah. I mean, look at our numbers, Josh. The number of people that want to be career firefighters right now is at like all-time lows. It's and in our estimation, it's an astonishingly good job. It pays more than most people would expect. The benefits are incredible. Schedule's awesome. And our numbers, I mean, we're a pretty good agency, so we still have enough people coming in to breed competition and get decent people. But more medium and lower tier in terms of pay and contract, they're having trouble getting bodies on ambulances and fire trucks. It's crazy. Yeah, you're right. That's not indicative of a recession. Trust me, when we're in a recession, our test will be full, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I hire associates and they leave in, for more money in a few weeks. I can tell you when in a recession, you're struggling to get a job. Like that's a recession, right? Labor force. Lacey Hunt, I don't know if you guys ever follow any of his stuff. I love the guy. He uses an economist term. He talks about how, when these costs of capital are going to rise, employers are going to have to rationalize their workforce, right? That's total bureaucratic Fed speak. But what he really means there is that, like, when push comes to shove, you're going to have to justify why you have a job here. Like, what do you do here? Like the line from Office Space? Yeah. Like, that's how recessions start.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I want to pivot to Bitcoin real quick. We have had some interchanges where you're critical of overly bullish Bitcoin sentiment. I know some of these questions you don't love about is the bottom end and where's the price going, but talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on price and performance and how that should be characterized right now.
So I continue to think just in terms of Bitcoin's price action, and because it's such a small market, it is whipsawed in a very confusing way throughout the majority of this year. You saw this pump you got from the ETF, filing by BlackRock. We can talk about whether that's, fundamentally driven or not.
Yeah, we got to talk about
but I
that.
think there's just a lot of, I think there's a lot of confusion, right? It's like, are the halving cycles still a thing? Is big money coming in, or are they not coming in? What's going on with the SEC and its fight against crypto and choke point 2.0 and efforts to affect the rails? And, as somebody who counsels folks in the space, like, there's genuine fear out there about banking wires being cut and access to exchanges being limited. I don't know if you guys have followed, some of the choke point 2.0 stuff, but it's crazy. And some of it I can't talk about because I'm involved in some of these cases, full disclosure. But, there's an arbitrary and capricious attack on quote unquote crypto. And the problem is for Bitcoin, it still gets lumped in with this crap.
Exactly.
And it is what it is. So you have to be realistic here. And from my standpoint, prognostications about what Bitcoin's going to do, and again, I don't want to get into a models debate, all this stuff. I understand that all models are wrong and models have utility and all this jazz. But when your average normie at the firehouse, which is what you guys talk to, right? When you tell them, well, Bitcoin's going to be $10 million in today's purchasing power in 4 years, these types of things, I think they're ridiculous. You lose credibility. And by the way, you ultimately set yourself up, or at least set those people up to be disappointed. I'm not disappointed in Bitcoin's price action. I think Bitcoin's performing extraordinarily well, given the environment, given where rates are at, given the treasury market, all these things. But I also want to be tempered in those expectations. I will be happy as a clam when Bitcoin makes a new all-time high, and I think it will. Okay. I'm not going to pretend to tell you when that occurs. And I'm not going to pretend to tell you I know with certainty that we'll never ever trade against below 15K. These sorts of things, I think, are they're helpful. I think maybe for some people that just want to constantly try to go out there and promote it, but in a way that to me it just feels kind of slimy. It feels like the Richard Hartz, who's in the news today, when he's promising, returns of, crazy exorbitant amounts. I don't want people to buy Bitcoin because of that, because I think those people will ultimately sell at the wrong time. They're going to buy at the wrong time. They're going to buy at the top and they're going to sell at the bottom because they don't understand it. I want to talk about the Bitcoin, what it actually does. And maybe that's not sexy or cool, but maybe I'm not cool.
No, but those are the things that create somebody that, has an understanding and has longevity in this. Like I can tell you from experience, the two of us in 2017, it was a total clown show for the first year. Like, we had hopped into the water around July and August of 2017 and just rode a rocket ship. And we'd be texting a group of 10 people at the firehouse, like, dude, is it going to 6, 10, 8? Where's it going to? It was just a complete joke. And
incredibly
few
shallow.
Of those people.
Yeah.
There's probably, out of the maybe 12 cohorts that had, invested or played around in these waters at that time, there's very few that had anything left by 2020. It was just a joke. And most of them sold it at the lows in 2019 or whenever it was like $3,000 or whatever.
It's
the point being is that
Yeah.
Exactly. If it's not a fundamental understanding, you really aren't gaining anything from this.
There is a balance here,
at the worst time.
There is a balance here. I think that for me, the line in the sand is timelines, because I am incredibly bullish, as I know the two of you are, long term. At some point in my life, I think it is very likely, and I don't feel any trepidation or I don't feel disingenuous at all saying into a microphone, I think, based on my research and understanding, that the buying power of a Bitcoin is going to blow fucking minds at some point in my life. And I think that is an okay thing to share. I think placing a timeline on it is not helpful. And I think that sets up somebody who's going to be disappointed and just not be strapped in for a long enough time frame. One thing we've been repeating on the show more recently is, is your time preference low enough for Bitcoin? And it's a real question, I think, that needs to be asked of a lot of people before they click buy. We're not talking about 1 year. We're not talking about 5 years. I'm moving that timeline out and starting to say, is the major portion of what you're accumulating in Bitcoin something that you're willing to leave alone for 10 years plus? And I think that timeline's moved out. For me, just as expectations have been violated. I agree that at this point, Joe, when I look at everything that's happened and what Bitcoin has accomplished over the last 14 years, it's absolutely remarkable. But a lot of us, myself included, were expecting way higher price points, say by 2023. And so I think it makes you in a healthy way reassess what expectations are, what timelines are. And I think it really is. I'll go back to my opening statement there. It's the timeline that I think is the most unhelpful. I don't know what.
Well, you did two things though. Okay, let's just reset, and you can roll it back. Whoever's listening is Dan. Not only did you not give a clear timeline, but you also said that you think the price is going to rip in, or I'm paraphrasing, but in today's purchasing power, right? That's different than telling people and filling people's heads with it's going to be X amount of dollars, right?
Yeah.
There's a guy on Twitter. He's more of a crypto guy. He's not a Bitcoin guy. He literally, and I'm not going to name names, but he literally posts a chart almost every day with some ridiculous like melt up thesis, like Bitcoin's going to be like 400 grand by like December. And I just got to tell you, like, I mean, that kind of analysis, it just makes me feel slimy. There's nothing that backs that. Could Bitcoin be $400,000 by December? Sure. But you don't know that. There's no way to model that. I mean, like, again, dynamic systems. And just one more thing is like I think the first time or the second time I was on your podcast, one of the things I always say is like, I go to bed at night and I put my head in the pillow and I think tomorrow I wake up, Bitcoin's at 500K. I'm going to be happy. Okay. Like but I'm also going to be happy if Bitcoin's at 5K because I know what Bitcoin will do long-term. And I honestly believe that. Like, I'm prepared for either because this decade is going to be nuts. It's going to be absolutely crazy. And for people to tell you how it's going to exactly go, I mean, listen, I don't know. You guys were around before the COVID plunge, right? I don't know a single TA guru, furu on Facebook, any financial analyst. I don't know anybody who said Bitcoin was going to dump to 4K and then proceed to absolutely rip to 60K almost in, a 12-month period. Yeah. I don't know anybody. There's no way to model that. Anything that people tell you that, I can use this percentage of this or this percentage of bonds, and it's ridiculous because tomorrow 2 countries could wake up and they could change the game.
Right.
And your model's not going to show that.
That's exactly why people shouldn't be timing this kind of stuff, because there's so many unpredictable factors, exactly as you enumerated there. And it happens to do this stuff in very short time frames many times. Yeah. Or the pump fake it did to 60 grand, back down to 28, back up to 69 or whatever it did. I never saw that coming. I thought it was over after that. But yeah.
The other thing too about the slimy aspect and where I think your point is really fair, Joe, we have to think about the competitiveness and incentives behind content creation. You have a lot of people on the internet that are looking to carve out their little corner that they can monetize. And it's really, really hard to do that. And everybody's fucking trying to do it. So there are some Hail Marys being thrown. I'm going to throw out this hollow price prediction at this date. In the off chance I'm right, I'm going Willy Woo parabolic. And
I forgot about Willy Woo.
And if I'm not, fuck it. I had such a low chance of making it anyways. So you do have some of these wayward social media content creation incentives where it can be effective and sexy, as you've said, to throw out bullshit and hope it sticks to the wall. And if it doesn't, just fade off into oblivion.
Well, there's a million of them doing the exact same thing. And then the survivorship bias is what everyone sees like, oh shit, that guy was right. So suddenly he's the guru of choice and he's the guy with the smiling blue eyes on YouTube videos, and everyone follows him right off the cliff.
Yeah. There's way too many things that interest me and that are consuming my thoughts than the price. Like, honestly, the price is going to do fine. People that are holding Bitcoin for the long term, it's going to be fine. I can't promise you're going to be able to retire in 2 years, but I will tell you that I have highest confidence in Bitcoin than any other asset. There's nothing even remotely close.
The retirements.
Why isn't that enough? Why isn't that enough for folks to gravitate towards?
Retirement must be a lot less than it's cooked up to be, because we've got at least 3 guys at the firehouse who could easily retire. They have their years. They've been there for 30 plus years. They just don't leave.
I mean, it's a testament to the fire service. Man. It is a testament to the fire service. People hang on when we like to do math problems on the whiteboard, Joe, in the kitchen sometimes, and mathematically demonstrate how people we're working alongside are literally working for free.
For free.
And hey, being a fireman's cool. There's no way to replicate shift change coffee at a firehouse. I'll tell you that. It's pretty special.
You guys talked about earlier Stephen King, right? Like, and how if you read up about him, like he writes every single day. He's worth millions and millions of dollars. Doesn't have to write a single thing. Gotta love it.
Love it.
But the old adage is that let's use a Bitcoin term, like proof of work, right? Proof of work keeps you alive. It really does. Proof of work keeps you alive. Putting forward hard effort, getting satisfaction, keeping your mind and your body, fresh and able to perform well. Those things, I think, I can't tell you how many older folks I've met, senior folks I've talked to, that once they retire, everything atrophies, and
we see it every day,
downward spiral.
Every single day. There's obviously a small percentage of people who retire, find themselves something else to focus on, and do really well, but the vast majority of people just atrophy. They sit in front of a TV. They don't have good friends. They sit by themselves in their apartment, and then they call 911 because they're depressed or whatever have you. Tons of myriad of medical problems. But you're absolutely right. When people don't have something to focus on, when they don't have some shiny object to reach for, they absolutely atrophy and just disintegrate.
And
so the Stoic. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say money only gets you so far, guys. That this is the other thing that does sometimes sick. I love Bitcoin. I love studying finance, economics, and markets. But I do so with personal caution because I don't want to be somebody that's completely consumed with money. I don't want to become Ebenezer Dan. Because, yes, money does induce and create freedom up to a point, and that is worth getting to that point, providing for your family, looking into the future and being responsible. But if your expectation is that because of X net worth, you're going to be a happier person, that is a fucking myth. And Josh and I have both said that. I feel like the earning capacity we're at, I am at the point where it is hard to imagine more money is going to make me happier. And so I caution people against kind of that grandiose grass is greener on the other side. It's fucking not. You need to be responsible with money, but don't let it consume your identity, your thoughts, and the entire, makeup of your inner being. It's going to leave you wanting.
I don't know if you guys are fans of Stoic philosophy or
love Marcus
study.
Aurelius.
Oh yeah,
are you going to quote Meditations? I hope.
Oh,
I love that book.
I'll quote just generally. There's so many Seneca, Epictetus. The Stoics. People think of philosopher as the guy who's sitting in a room and he's not living, right? He's not experiencing anything. He's just studying a text or thinking about the nature of matter. The coolest thing about the Stoics for me, all those characters, they really prided themselves on hard work, and not just like the hard work of mental like study and rigorous academic study. It was actually like physical study, like stretching their body, strengthening their body, right? There's so many analogies throughout all the Stoic writing that they talk about, fights with bears and gladiatorial matches. And they use these analogies and metaphors to communicate their principles. And it's for a good reason, because they want to show the body. They want to show the body who's boss, and it's the mind, right? When I go for a run, when you go for a run, right? Part of the reason you do that and you push yourself is because you're trying to use that proof of work to show your body, I'm in control here. I'm the boss. I'm going to show you exactly what's going to happen, body, and you're going to listen to me. And that's so powerful. Like, if back to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Like focusing your day, not procrastinating, trying to be productive. If you hone that skill, like you're invincible. You're like superhuman.
There's absolutely nothing like getting a good workout in right away in the morning. Your day is just, it's like the endorphin rush. You just have a much better outlook on the day. You're in a massively better place mentally. And I couldn't agree more.
We just talked to Austin Herbert last episode. Half the episode we spent on fitness and health. And I'm just here to say, if you're not prioritizing these things, you are not reaching your potential. Even honestly, like, let's just take this podcast, which for a couple blokes like Josh and I, it's been a lot of work for a couple and a half years to do this in addition to a couple kids and full-time day jobs. This podcast wouldn't be possible without me working out all the time. I just wouldn't have the energy. I wouldn't have the discipline. I know, Josh, you feel the same way. Just to distill this small project down as a microcosm. Most high achievers, extremely high achievers. Now, there are exceptions. You take the billionaires, the CEOs, the content creators, even Joe Rogan. I was listening to him last night. The dude is an absolute savage. He cold plunges every morning, works out every single morning. And it's just to divorce the mind from the body, you're not going to achieve your potential. I guarantee it. Even if you're high functioning and fat, I guarantee you'd be higher functioning if you were lean and mean.
Dude, his cold plunge routine is like 34-degree water for 20 minutes. Like, that's
oh my gosh,
fucking insane.
Insane.
I can't even barely squeeze my way through a cold shower.
Yeah. We got to talk about
ETF, man.
litigation. We got to talk about BlackRock. Start on either end of the spectrum there.
Okay, so let's start with BlackRock, right? And I'll give you my overall view. First of all, I have to say this so I don't get attacked in the comments, but I am, I'm generally cautiously optimistic about the prospect of an ETF. I'm not saying there's no chance. If you had a gun to my head today and you said, Joe, tell me the probability, because I live in probabilities, that's how I work. Tell me the probability of an ETF getting approved in the next year, so a year from today. Okay, I would probably go with somewhere between 30 to 40%. And there's a reason for that. Because with the BlackRock filing, I do not believe anything in the structure of the ETF itself fundamentally changed or altered the SEC's outlook on the market. And it also did not meet the test that the SEC wanted and still wants, by the way, in the appellate court. Overall, my view is that the reason the BlackRock filing was made is because I think after the oral arguments that were in the Grayscale versus SEC appellate case, which, as you know, that was where Grayscale was basically suing, trying to argue that the order denying the spot ETF conversion was arbitrary and capricious. When those oral arguments were completed, many were optimistic about the prospect that Grayscale might actually win, that the appellate court may actually say, we think you messed up here, SEC. We're going to try to direct you to reconsider this issue. And if you're BlackRock and you're monitoring those proceedings, or any other ETF filer, and you think there's a reasonable chance that that ruling could come down, you want to have one in the hopper, right? You want to have a space in line with the filing, because these things sit on the SEC's desk for a period of time. Many times they extend them out time and time again. They don't rule on them. They just sort of punt for a while. They did that with the futures ETF for a while. It was pending for quite a while before they ended up actually greenlighting it. So I think it was an easy hedge for BlackRock to effectively say, if there's a reasonable chance that that Grayscale prevails, we want to have one in line so that we could get it granted. But let's go back to what they've said very quickly without boring your audience. What the SEC has said for 5 years now. They have repeatedly said that the reason they will not greenlight a spot ETF is because of a lack of true insight to detect fraud and manipulation in the spot market. Now, keep in mind, the SEC has conceded that their goal is not to prevent fraud. That's not their goal. Their goal is to detect it, to monitor it, and to be able to know when they can do an enforcement action against someone attempting to manipulate the price. So the reason they want to know how to detect it is because they can actually file lawsuit, right? They can seek out the wrongdoer. They know that every day in many markets, manipulation occurs, and there's no way you can fully prevent market manipulation. They approved the futures ETF because the CME, where the futures contracts trade, is well regulated. There's a ton of insight. They cooperate with the SEC. They will file any sort of suspicious activity reports they need to when there's attempts to manipulate the futures contract. But they say the spot market, where the majority of it is overseas, outside the purview of U.S. regulators, that's a black box. We don't know what's happening on Binance. We don't know if they're trading against their own customers. We don't know if they're spoofing. We don't know if there's all sorts of malicious activity to mess with things. So the SEC has said, this is what we want. We want surveillance sharing agreements, which is just a fancy way of saying we want an agreement where there's data provided to us about trading on a regular basis. We want surveillance sharing agreements with a market of sufficient size. And in the appellate case with Grayscale, they said, what is a market of sufficient size? It is a market where someone would necessarily have to trade on, where they would have to be trading on that marketplace to manipulate the price. Okay, so let's apply that to what BlackRock did. BlackRock did a filing where they have a surveillance sharing agreement with Coinbase and with NASDAQ. Okay, and that agreement shows you the U.S. Coinbase exchanges spot activity. Now, Josh and Dan, both weigh in here, and I'll shut up. If you were attempting to manipulate, quote unquote, manipulate the price of Bitcoin, would you necessarily have to trade on Coinbase?
No.
Okay, so how does it meet the test the SEC actually put forward? And it said in the appellate court, they're fighting this right now with Grayscale. How does it meet the test?
I don't think it would, but I guess the question I have is, how could it ever? How could it ever meet that? Because this is a global asset, as we've enumerated. Like you have Binance, you've got OKCoin, and 10,000 other bullshit exchanges that are floating around in this world. How could this thing ever pass that test? And then I guess in the markets that are relevant for ETFs that exist under the SEC's regulation, those are all trading within the United States. So that obviously
the other comment I want, the other, just to push back a tad, and I'm curious your thoughts here. The Overton window is changing. Headwinds are changing in terms of who's interested. I mean, we have to paint. It's fucking BlackRock, right? Politically in markets. I mean, even reading these Forbes articles. I mean, it's article after article that suddenly flip positive. My point is that it feels to me as a dunce on the sideline. Yes, that may be the wording right now, and this filing is not going to meet that criteria. But these regulatory headwinds feel like, to me, they could back to everything being able to flip on a dime. What if this flips on a dime? It feels like as the narrative changes and public perception changes and power players see this differently, this could change rather rapidly. I don't know how you view that.
Well, I just really quick on his comment. I think there's that part of it as well, but this game theoretical, the other countries creating ETFs, putting pressure on the SEC. Canada's got a few of them. Other countries are creating them. At what point can they, hold this dam up and keep plugging the holes before they have to kind of relent?
Well, there will eventually be an ETF. I mean, there's no secret then. The question is, what's the time frame again? And I think you start from the premise that if you agree that nothing fundamentally changed in the structure, then the real only difference here is the name, right? That BlackRock filed it. And, maybe that will be enough to make regulators just suddenly pivot. I know that people think BlackRock is omnipotent and all powerful and can do whatever it wants. I disagree with that. I know cases where they've lost badly in litigation. And I know actions filed by the government against them where, the government has been successful against them. So I don't think they're as all powerful Wizard of Oz as many people think they are. But putting that all aside, to answer your first question, Josh, you asked me, how could that ever change? Well, you listed one reason. If you had the majority of liquidity in the U.S. market, that would easily, and that marketplace. So say Coinbase had 90% of, or not even 90. Say Coinbase had 70% of all international volume. Okay, and then they had a surveillance sharing agreement. That would, I think, almost unquestionably get an ETF approved. If you had 70% of the volume,
if I'm a regulator, I guess I would just think, but that could change quickly because people can withdraw those coins, they can move them somewhere else. Like it's not like they have a monopoly on holding those coins once they're in Coinbase. They can flow. You know what I mean? They can flow overseas.
It's the beauty of Bitcoin, though.
Just curious.
It's like you're regulating it. You're regulating a slippery hawk. I mean,
it's not the coins; it's the volume. So if you had, I'm sure that wouldn't be just for one day. If Coinbase demonstrated a pattern for years that they could, had the majority of U.S. based or majority of global volume, that would be enough, right? Similarly, Binance, right, has consistently had the majority of spot volume, supposedly for last several years, right? So if Binance really wanted an ETF in the U.S., they could easily submit to a surveillance sharing agreement, even if they weren't domiciled in the United States. They could say, here you go, SEC, here's our books and records, which they are fighting tooth and nail for you not to see, whatever that means. Right. I'll leave that conclusion yourself, why they don't want you to see that. But putting that aside, right, if you had a structural change in the market where a significant amount of those market players all banded together and had surveillance sharing agreements, that would likely be enough, I think, to meet the SEC's own test. However, to the question Dan raised about the Overton window, sure, the SEC could pivot, right? They could change their viewpoint. They've done it in the past. They can say, no, we're not going to apply this heightened standard. However, what I would push back against with that is I would say that if that were the case, if their goal was to pivot and just suddenly approve a BlackRock ETF, why would they continue to press forward and await a decision in the SEC versus Grayscale suit? Said differently, okay, why wait for potentially a very bad loss, another embarrassing loss for the SEC when they were going to turn around and give approval to BlackRock's ETF? You could easily file a motion in 2 minutes informing the appellate court, we intend to change our view on this issue, therefore this case is now moot. And you can dismiss it appellate court and don't save us the embarrassment of losing in a high-profile case. It doesn't make sense logically why they wouldn't do that if they intended to prove the BlackRock ETF at this time.
Start9 operating system is a full-fledged, cutting-edge Linux operating system. Its functionality and adaptability make it an excellent choice for the users who value simplicity, efficiency, and privacy. Running a Bitcoin node? Start9 is your go-to solution. Setting up a node has never been so easy. With a Start9 server, backups are more than just an afterthought. At the push of a button, create encrypted backups, ensuring your data stays safe and sound, out of the reach of big tech companies. Start9's commitment to security goes even further. StartOS is encrypted for all LAN communications. This ensures your passwords and assets are always protected. The StartOS marketplace of apps includes everything from Lightning to secure messaging apps to secure password management. If you care to be sovereign in the digital age, running a StartOS server is a must. And the best part? You can download and set up StartOS on any machine, or you can purchase a plug-and-play Start9 server directly from Start9. Choose Start9 for a secure, streamlined, and flexible computing experience. When Dan and I are at the firehouse and we have finally delivered the orange pill to a new plebe, we recommend Swan for their first Bitcoin purchase, always. Swan has the user interface absolutely nailed. We have seen people go from no-coiners to Bitcoiners in under a minute. It's just that easy. The problem with sending friends and family to other exchanges is exposing them to all kinds of BS. You will never see Swan encourage your friends or family to buy Dogecoin. Instead, Swan educates. Swan produces some of the best educational content in the space. That is a big freaking deal. The difference between somebody who buys on a whim and sells for a loss and those that hold for the long term is simply an education gap. We have been using Swan to dollar cost average into Bitcoin every single day since 2020. If you want a family member to turn into a Bitcoiner, there is no better place to go than Swan. For daily DCA, IRA, or education, Swan is the place to go. You can try Swan Premium on us for free. This includes exclusive Swan content, market insights, and other discounts. Click on our link in the show notes and use password BlueCollarBitcoin. Just real quick here on that case, how long do you think before that plays out till its end?
The grayscale case?
Yeah.
We could get a ruling in the next several weeks.
Well, I guess the reason I'm asking is because maybe they're kind of holding this thing hostage until they see how that rolls out.
Absolutely. And by the way, if they lose, then it could be fair game. They'd all get approved. But just one thing about this, okay, structurally, everybody says BlackRock's getting the ETF. It doesn't matter if it's Dan, Josh, Joe, Elmer Fudd, anybody who files a paperwork that is approved, okay, as long within reason, and it copies the same structure. For example, if BlackRock's structure were approved, anyone else could come along and file the exact same paperwork and get it approved too if they met all the criteria. In other words, that SEC can't pick and choose favorites. That's not their role. They similar to the futures ETF. Once there was a futures ETF approved, it wasn't like that's the only futures ETF for Bitcoin. There were multiple futures ETF products that were launched. So the SEC, once they let one through, there's going to be multiple. So it's not going to be just one entity corners the market.
As we close out the BlackRock discussion, and some of this was talked about in the spaces you were in with us the other day, and it's been mulled over a ton. It's hard for me to know whether this is the net positive, net negative, and I can see a lot of the pushback on the concerns that these big players entering brings. But it is nonetheless remarkable. Like, it may sound shallow, but I remember when Larry Fink was calling Bitcoin an index of money laundering. And now he's using words like hope and saying it can revolutionize finance. Whether he or someone on his research team, I don't know what the pivot is for, or all the reasons why. It is pretty crazy to hear him getting on Fox and saying this shit. It's wild.
Yeah, it is wild from a historical perspective, but just a couple questions and things to think about. And I don't want to poo-poo this or get people, upset about it. But does Larry Fink own Bitcoin?
I guess we don't know.
Okay. I don't think he does. But putting that aside, does BlackRock own Bitcoin? Because BlackRock doesn't need an ETF to buy Bitcoin. Do they own Bitcoin? With their trillions of assets, or I think it's billions, but I don't think they have. Is it trillion?
I mean, honestly,
I don't think so. And I see where you're going, because the other pushback would be BlackRock enters every single market, right? So like they enter every single market. They have their tentacles on every side of finance. So even if they think it's a clown show, which by the way, some of those comments would contradict that. Larry's saying some positive things about it, but once this market reaches whatever they view as a significant, important size, they're going to enter even if they think it's a clown show.
Joe, I want to ask you, what do you think
$180 billion under management, their assets that they hold, not for investors, but their assets. My understanding is from all their filings, they hold no Bitcoin.
But you would admit it brings a legitimacy to the asset class that is still significant. It's
the fact that they're saying nice things about it.
Yeah, the fact that the leader of the largest financial organization in the world is saying positive things about it when he was calling it a complete fraudulent joke.
Sure,
that's a huge narrative shift, and that's a big deal.
Yeah, no, but I mean, what would be his ulterior motive? Why would he want to say positive things about Bitcoin?
Oh, that's easy.
So, yeah, I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, he'd be able to monetize it. You're going to sell a product. I mean, if he gets the ETF, they're going to make a boatload of money. You know how much money Grayscale makes from the GBTC?
Oh, I know.
It is
sickening.
Absolute
ridiculous.
It's sickening.
It's sickening. So why wouldn't BlackRock say nice things about Bitcoin to have a bunch of people buy an ETF structure that they control, that they can monetize, they get the fees for?
Damn it, Joe! I was hoping for a much more insidious, dark plan here.
No, it's
you
money.
really ruined that entire rabbit hole.
It's
with
money.
Your logic.
It's money. They want to sell a product. I mean, to me, like, again, and this is just the world I'm in. Like, talk is cheap, right? You can say, "Oh, you have a wonderful client, Mr. Carlasare. Okay, how much are you going to pay to settle the case?" That's the kind of approach you have to take. Like, I appreciate that he's saying nice things about Bitcoin. That's wonderful, right?
We like to get.
What I wish a reporter who would have done 5 minutes worth of work during that interview say, well, if you think Bitcoin is hope for a brighter future, which it is, by the way, why don't you own any, Larry? Why doesn't BlackRock own any? You own, strip malls in rural areas that are net losses for 10 years in a row, just complete, they're money pits. But you don't own it. You don't own $1 million worth of Bitcoin on the BlackRock balance sheet.
Yeah, it's a fair question. Needs to be asked. Let's talk about the cases. And let's do high-level takeaways, because I know you could get into the explanation of all these. But what we got, SEC Binance, SEC Coinbase, SEC Richard Hart. I mean, I heard you. I think it was on with Preston. I mean, the Coinbase case is they're questioning their right to exist. Is I think what you said. I mean, this is a really, really foundational prodding into Coinbase.
It's amazing.
Whatever, wherever you want to go there, but what's the state of these cases, and what do you think the high level takeaways are?
So we knew the cases were coming. I was talking about this back in the fall, and after SBF blew up, we knew they were working them, and then Coinbase gets the Wells notice, and I think the big question at that point wasn't whether they would be sued; it was how broad is the suit going to be. And I will tell you, they pretty much couldn't have made a more broad suit. Not only do they go after their their yield activities, not only do they go after individual tokens on the platform, but they say you are not properly registered as a broker dealer, as a clearinghouse, as an exchange. You're violating all these statutes. You never had a right to exist for these statutes per our regulation in the first place. Like you are running afoul of the law through existing in the manner in which you're existing. So the notion that just ends with some sort of slap on the wrist is possible. However, I'm very skeptical of it because of how sweeping it is. And I will note that they copied in both the Binance and the SEC suits huge sections of the allegations about what it would means to be a registered exchange in the United States, what it means to be a registered broker dealer. So they're clearly taking an approach that would apply to any quote unquote crypto exchange in the United States, that you have really no right to exist under the current framework, and you should stop operations immediately.
NBD.
Yeah. So by the way, just to reference back again, who was the surveillance sharing agreement that BlackRock put forward with? It was a partnership between Coinbase and NASDAQ. Okay. So you're going to tell me that they're going to approve the BlackRock ETF when the underlying custodian and marketplace that would serve as the surveillance sharing center does not have a right to exist pursuant to the same entity, the SEC, which is saying we're suing you, telling you we want an injunction to stop exchange-related activities. But by the way, we're going to let BlackRock's ETF sail through where the underlying marketplace that we wanted to be sufficiently monitored is not appropriately registered.
Yeah, they're courting they're courting a partner with an absolutely massive broomstick up their ass. I mean, it is crazy to think about the implications. Like another one of your tweets, and I think what you've been hinting at is just Brian Armstrong saying we've had all these meetings with the SEC. And I think you're hinting at the fact that what the SEC has been saying in these 30-some meetings is delist everything other than Bitcoin because they're unregistered securities. And Brian Armstrong's pretending like it's been cooperation, and it's just basically been the chaperone saying, get out of the fountain. Get out of the fucking fountain. Get out of the fucking fountain over and over again.
There is a, sort of a culture in tech that for many years now has gone really unchecked, which is move fast and break things, right? Do whatever you need to do. And then after the fact, you pay a fine or beg for forgiveness. And the problem, I think, or for the issue at this point is that for Coinbase, they're saying, no, we're not going to just let you off with a warning or let you slap with a slap on the wrist. For whatever reason, we're going to take the harshest possible approach to this. Yeah. And by the way, guys, again, I got to be careful about talking about particular clients or anything, but this is not just the official stuff you're reading about with the cases that are filed. There's all sorts of public reports. Go read the Cooper and Cook report, right? They detail various institutions who have been told you cannot operate and serve crypto companies. You cannot provide accounting services. I would suspect that soon they'll say lawyers can't, support some of these entities in the future, which we'll challenge. But the point is that like the efforts both on the, there's the hot war and the cold war, right? And we hear a lot about the hot war, the filing suits against Binance, filing suits against Richard Hart and Coinbase. What you don't hear enough about is the cold war that's going on behind the scenes. And that is really ratcheting up. Keep in mind, again, for anybody who's not familiar with this should shock the conscience. When Signature Bank went down, okay, on the board of Signature Bank was Barney Frank, okay, not exactly a raging conservative. He former chair of the House Financial Services Committee, prominent liberal Democrat. Barney Frank publicly stated in his own view, being on the board of Signature Bank, that Signature Bank was killed because it was pro-crypto, because it was servicing crypto, and it had nothing to do with actual liquidity issues at the bank.
Yeah, I think it's a wise caution. Back to being careful with bullishness, maybe it's that when this enforcement happens at these bottlenecks, it could be a really big deal, at least in the short, medium term.
I think right. Dude, what Coinbase did is very similar to like the Uber model of we're just going to do this. We know that, taxi medallions are the official way for people to move around the city, but fuck them. We're just going to move in with our new app and we're going to send our drivers out there and do it. But Coinbase is doing this on a level that is, an order of magnitude more official than the medallion system in Chicago or New york. Like they're just not, the SEC is just not going to look the other way in this case.
Yeah. Well, let me, paint the flip side. Okay. Because you got to look at these things from both sides. And if you're a crypto lawyer on this podcast, what you're going to tell you both right now is that the SEC just got their hat handed to them in the Ripple decision. That the Judge Torres opinion, that's if it doesn't get appealed and stands right now, is at least one district court that says secondary market sales are not investment contracts. What that means that is effectively all of the secondary market sales on Coinbase are immune from a securities analysis standpoint because the buyers and the sellers don't know they're interacting with the original issuer. I think it's wrong. I think the logic doesn't follow through. There's already been a decision sort of softly criticizing Judge Torres' logic. However, you can't just completely write off, if you're a Bitcoiner, the fact that at least one judge has said that these things don't fit the bill under Howey for a traditional securities analysis. And we should approach it that way. I mean, I can't stand the overly simplistic, again, and basically soundbite that everything is a security, right? Because, do you think Dogecoin is a security? What about Bitcoin Cash? What about Litecoin? Like, these things aren't securities, they just suck. They're terrible projects, right? But I mean, we kind of have to show a little bit more nuance in the community and try to let people know, listen, I think the judge is incorrect. There's going to be a lot of cases on both ways. And eventually I think there will be a high level appellate court decision or potentially a Supreme Court decision that will resolve the matter. But that can take years. And in the interim, you could see another altcoin pump that, unfortunately takes advantage of a lot of people.
What do you think, playing probabilities, is going to happen to Coinbase?
I think Coinbase is in for a very long haul in litigation. I don't expect this to end anytime soon. I suppose it's always possible, but my guess is we will be talking about the Coinbase SEC suit well into late 2024 and into 2025. How I think it ends up, I think ultimately they're going to lose on some of it, they're going to win on some of it, and I don't think it's going to be it's going to result in the end of Coinbase. What it could ultimately be is it could prompt Coinbase to relocate overseas.
Okay. Let's talk Ripple again for a second, because getting emotions involved, and I used to own a lot of XRP. I'm gonna admit it. I fucking hate Ripple. I hate the project.
Scumbags.
I think it just from it represents in so many ways the exact opposite of what Bitcoin is trying to accomplish. But I'm hearing so many mixed opinions on what this ruling meant that you just hinted at. Was this a win for Ripple? And talk on that a little bit more.
Well, given what you just said about how they're the opposite of Bitcoin, it was highly controlled. The founders, there's evidence in the record that they pumped up the spot market, that they intervened to try to create a narrative. They told investors that you're going to get in early if you buy these tokens, and then retail got dumped on. And then it's kind of such a perverse ruling, right? Let's just think about this for a second. The initial guys with tons of preferred access, that's the security, that's the unregistered security, those initial institutional sales, that's inappropriate in the eyes of the law. But the dumping on retail, because it was blind and because the retail didn't directly interact with Ripple, that's what's not a security. Think about
and the marketing at retail, like the marketing. It's like a giant circle jerk of ripping them off and then marketing it back to them.
The whole point of Howey was to protect consumers, right? How is it protecting the general public to say those secondary market sales when you took the money from mom and pops? How is that's okay? We're not going to have any issue with that. But we're going to have issue only with the sales to the billionaires and millionaires who had preferred easy access. To me, it turns logic on its head. But what I would say this, given the history and the facts that the SEC put forward and the amount of time and resources devoted to the case, Dan, I don't see how, a tie effectively, win one, lose one, how that's a victory for the SEC. The SEC needed to make a bold statement and they needed a huge win. And to me, I think it's not a huge win. It's a more of the same. It's okay. Here's a roadmap now for at least some people who want to engage in this kind of nonsense. Here's how at least you stand some basis for avoiding liability, because you can always cite to Judge Torres's opinion. However, again, our system works very slowly, and there are plenty of times where I had a great case and it got reversed on appeal, and there are plenty of times I had a difficult case, I lost, and we won on appeal, and it came back down. It was successful. That's just our system, right? As it stands right now, one judge made a ruling, and it's her right. She gets appointed by the president. That's her job, but it is not the final say.
Yeah,
it would appear that at least partially they did move fast enough. They broke some things, and yeah, it's a little bit of a shame. It's a little bit of a shame just because I do think the market will play this out long term. There's just not a foundational use case. It's so vapid in so many ways and hollow that
there doesn't need to be, though.
Right.
And this is the problem. The problem is that in the bull markets, okay, and this is just a market structure thing. It took me a long time to understand this. When you have a big object, okay, it's physics, right? It takes more energy to propel that thing higher, right? When you have a little tiny object, it takes a lot less energy. So the scammier it is, I don't know if you guys heard about this token that launched like a couple of days ago, this bald token that like is a total joke, right? It can move so quick and so fast because it's just a tiny little piece of crap, right? It's not, there's nothing there. Okay. Same thing with Hex. There's such a small market cap. There's no real money that a handful of people can pump it to the moon, suck in retail, dump, and have their exit liquidity, right? The same is true of all these alts, really. I mean, the majority of the space, the majority of crypto is Bitcoin, stablecoins, and Ethereum. You got to throw Ethereum in there. You take out those major pillars of quote unquote crypto, what's there? You got a bunch of little speculative things that can't die, but in a bull run, because of the ability to pump it is so easy and so attractive, and it's so easy to set up all these bots. And I mean, I can't tell you how many bots I have attack me. One time I had like hundreds of XRP bots spamming my Twitter feed, attacking me where I couldn't even like refresh the app.
I'm not sure they were bots. Those people might actually be that stupid.
Yeah, it might be Redditors, dude.
Or it might be both. It might be both. Like I mean, I'm just telling you that like it's such an easy scam to do, because now we have a federal court that's saying, well, just don't directly interact with the consumers. Let your armies, let the XRP army, and let others do it for you on your behalf. Well, it's really messed up.
And
the XRP
you know,
army.
Gambling is addictive. The game of hot potato has been around for fucking centuries. I don't know what someone tell me when the game of hot potato originated, but it's a fun game because everybody likes to play until someone gets burnt. So, you know, it is addicting for retail, you know, just as gambling is. So it's not all people getting screwed. There is a large percentage of people that have stuck their hand in that fire, and some will make it out and some won't. But it's, yeah, I mean, I said this on the Spaces the other day. We have increasingly, you know, we want to be cautious. We don't know all these projects in and out, but we've started to lead more in our explanation for new people, talking about the difference between Bitcoin and crypto. That used to be maybe, you know, 0.4 or 5, but I think it's important for people to know that early, because they're not just different, they're polar opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I start out from sorry, Josh, but I start out from the premise, just like well, you know, altcoins, those are really for gambling. You know, that's what people want. And I think you earn a lot of credibility just starting out there and saying like, they're really gambling. It's not really investing. There's no long-term use case. There's no long-term roadmap. It's all just a bunch of, you know, Fugazi, just, you know, made up BS. And if you want to gamble, go gamble. Like you could gamble on the boat. You can gamble on sports, right? You can gamble with your altcoins. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, but if you actually want something that could be revolutionary and change the world, you buy Bitcoin.
For sure. And that's my experience too. Like even just in our small microcosm at the firehouse, guys understand, like the guys that are playing in these bullshit altcoins, they understand that this isn't changing anything in the world. This is just simply trying to gamble and make some money. Whereas like 2017, there were people, proponents of XRP, proponents of IOTA. I don't know why that one came to mind, but there are people believed that shit back then. At least in our circles, people believed that shit. Now it's very recognizably pure gambling, and that's fine. Like if you want to take $500 and gamble, that's on you. You're an adult.
Yep.
As we round this thing out, I have one more question for you, Joe. A lot of people love to talk about being 100% all in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
What's your take on that proposition, especially for somebody who's maybe middle-aged, maybe has not the longest runway to work with here? How would you approach talking to somebody about that? And what would be your recommendation for like a rational way to allocate your money in this crazy, volatile decade we're living in?
Yeah. Well, let's start from the premise of like how you should allocate your money. And again, I can't give like any individual financial advice, and that's not what we're doing here, but I think you have to consider all the variables, right? The way a guy who has $1,000 to his name allocates his money versus a guy who has 50 million is totally different. It's complete, even if they're the same age in life. So you've got net worth. Your net worth should be a factor in how you allocate your money. Your second issue is your age, right? And your third is your job. Your fourth are your family and commitments and obligations and, you know, whatever dependence you may have. And then the fifth, I think that's really key, is emotion. Okay, so you got 5 variables. So like when you ask a question, which is a great fair question, and it's a good one we should be talking about in Bitcoin circles. Well, what allocation is appropriate? And we you know, the old American HODL, which is hilarious, the 6.15 Bitcoin, that's what you should own. Everybody should own that. Like, you know, I get it. Like they're kind of shorthand, But the reality is you have to deal with those five different variables before you can make any decision. And to me, the most important thing I've said, from being in Bitcoin now for, more than 7 years, I think emotion's key. I mean, there is who shall remain nameless again, a friend of mine who was 100% Bitcoin and completely lost it. Honestly, I think he lost it in a very public way, and I think it really hurt him. And I think he sold down to a level that was right for him. God bless. But in so doing, it really scarred him, and it changed his view of the asset, and it changed his relationships and everything. You don't want to go down that path, right? The most important thing I would say, for anybody trying to get exposure to Bitcoin is you have to know yourself and know the emotions you're going to be dealing with. Yeah. And then 100%. Everything flows from there. Everything flows from there. I mean, if you're a younger person, you have limited dependence, but you also have limited assets. I don't have any problem with you being 100% Bitcoin, but if I have a massive Bitcoin holding, right, as a percentage of my net worth, and my wife tolerates it. But I will tell you that when Bitcoin is not doing well, I think it affects her more than it does me in some respects. So it's hard when you got a family and you got kids and you are nearing retirement. I mean, certainly people in retirement, if Bitcoin goes through a long winter, right, for several years, you have to think about that. Are you going to be selling persistently at the bottom? It's just, to me, what I like to have other assets for a variety of reasons. One of the things, to answer your question about why I hold a lot of stocks, is because I do believe that the relative stability of stocks, even if it's a smaller portion of my overall portfolio, it makes me calmer during Bitcoin downtrends. It's a crutch emotionally, because I've had stocks for decades now that I've held since I was a kid. And I also enjoy productive companies and studying the markets and seeing what is valued. And it's just a different beast how the stock market works than Bitcoin. They're just very, very different. Yeah. And to me, I think that there's value in that. There's value psychologically in diversification, but also from a financial aspect. If there was a time where Bitcoin was on a fire sale and I had my stocks that were holding up relatively well, I would probably sell more. I mean, I have. This is something that's occurred. I've sold stocks at various points, which they don't go down 70, 80%, in short periods of time. You have that relative stability, you have dividends, and I can draw down that position to reallocate to Bitcoin. If you're 100% in Bitcoin, and tomorrow, you're hardcore Bitcoiners, right, in this podcast, you're 100% Bitcoin. Every dollar you have is left, and you borrowed more money, like Michael Saylor was telling people to buy into Bitcoin. What happens if we wake up tomorrow and Bitcoin's at 5K? What are you going to buy? Going to take out more loans? Yeah. Come on. You have to have other, I think, pots to go on, when pots of money or pots of assets to draw upon in that situation.
We've said it a lot. We'll say it again. It's all individual, but too much Bitcoin as a percentage of your net worth can mean less Bitcoin in the long run.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's hard to conceptualize when you just got started. You read your first couple books and you're beside yourself. You're so enamored with this thing, but be cautious, be careful, play out the scenarios. I think employment, one of the 5 things you said is so incredibly important. How much job security do you have? How reliable is your cash flow going to be? It's a huge question that needs to be answered.
What you said about emotions is 100% accurate. And I trend myself. I know my psychology well enough to know when everything in me screams I need to sell Bitcoin is exactly when I need to buy it. And then you mentioned Stoicism earlier. If you're going to hold a significant amount of Bitcoin versus your net worth, you better read some Seneca, and you better read some works of the Stoics, because you're going to need them. You're going to need to weather the storm with some kind of philosophy, and you better be able to not look at the price for long periods of time to just center yourself.
You go into those rooms. I mean, I felt like I was holding people's hand. I mean, I was holding people's hands in November of last year. People were really upset. They were pissed off.
Yeah. By the way, you've mentioned American Hodl a couple times the last hour and a half. We have him.
Love the guy.
We have him slotted, Joe, for the first time.
It's going to be good. It's going to be really good.
I've said it's like American Hodl is like that best friend girl that you've had for a long time that you know you're going to fuck at some point, Josh, but it just hasn't happened yet. Maybe this is hubristic for
you don't really care.
Hubristic for us to say, but I feel like this show is just built for American HODL. It's funny though, he's dead honest. He's like, we've got him slated for I think 9/11. He's like, I won't remember. So it's on you guys. You guys better remind me a few days before. HODL, it's on the record. We're gonna fucking bug you. We're gonna make this happen.
HODL does many things very well, and he's extremely bright. And I think he's two things I'll just tell you should probe into a little bit if I can make a humble suggestion.
Please do.
Number one,
notepad is out.
His creative background, his messaging background, those sorts of things I think are well documented. But also just like his taste in art and music and movies is superb. Like we had long discussions about Christopher Nolan and things, and he's really, really good in that. In fact, he'll be getting an early copy of the novel when it's completed. Probe into that because I'd love to hear some of that guy's background on that. And I've talked with him on Clubhouse a ton, and he's super interesting on that. But also one thing he does way better than me, and I'm totally jealous of. And I think part of it is a little bit of unfair because he's been around a little bit longer than I have, a year or so. And he's got a bigger Bitcoin stack. But the thing he does really well is HODL in a sneaky way is able to go into Bitcoin echo chambers and change the narrative, right? He's able to challenge some of the echo chamber without, getting into a huge fighting match, pissing match with everybody in there. And I think it's one of the like elder statesman type things he can kind of do, but he's really good at it. Like, I mean, there would be people repeating the same nonsense again and again, and he will challenge it. And by the end of it, everybody agrees with him. So his ability, again, it's sneaky. So probe into his ability to challenge Bitcoin dogma. And he'll talk about it. I mean, him and I have had long conversations about this because I think there are some things, I'm just guessing here, but I think he'll say something like, there are some things that are just non-negotiable. You can't, it's a lost cause in trying to argue these things, but there are ways to approach the echo chamber.
Legend. We'll probe deeply into the HODL.
Yeah. We're going to probe you, American HODL. Joe, thank you so much, man. Dedicating an hour and 40 minutes of your evening pleasure. After what we know was a busy day. Any handoff you want to give to yourself, the novel, your work?
So it's like the Big Short again. I'll do my second Big Short references. We live in an era of fraud in America, right? Like we live in an era of nonstop fraud, breaches of contract, breaches of fiduciary duty, people playing fast and loose with the rules. So my day job, and I do have one, is a commercial litigator. I love litigation, it's especially in Bitcoin. So if you're a Bitcoin entrepreneur, if you are someone who's worked in Bitcoin, if you have been scammed by someone in crypto, I'm happy to, if you have a litigated dispute generally, please reach out. Breaches of fiduciary duty, breaches of contract. I have a national practice. My firm has resources to fight with the biggest law firms in the world, and we do. So if you have issues or things that I could help you with, please reach out. Just Google my name, Joe Carlasare at Amundsen Davis, and I'd be happy to chat with you about it. If I can't help you, I guarantee you I know someone in the legal field who can help you. And I do a lot of that. I have a lot of calls where I just, I genuinely want people who have been taken advantage of to get proper legal representation. Because far too often what happens, Josh and Dan, is that people get scammed and then they curl up like a turtle and they don't want to talk to anybody and they let the wrongdoers get away with it. And it's not right.
Yeah.
You have to get fucked by the long dick of the law.
Yeah. Joe will pull that dildo out of your ass. Joe, we need to do this in person. If you're comfortable being around two guys like us at any point, but one of these in the future, we need to do this in person. Maybe we'll come your way or you come one of our ways, and we'll do a little basement beer.
If I can make a suggestion, October in person, because market's going to be absolutely wild. We didn't even talk about like some of the crazy stuff in Japan and the bond market.
I know I had Japan. Japan actually was starred on here, and we didn't get to it, but
yeah. Well, October is where things heat up, guys. Trust me.
Oh yeah. Hey, I'm just curious, when you do pull that dildo out of someone's ass who got scammed, what percentage of the money can they actually expect to generally get back out of that dildo?
How much poop can you get off of it, Joe?
It all depends on where the scammer's located, right? The best thing scammers ever do is get out of the United States. If they're in the United States, there's a lot of tools and levers you can pull. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. I don't want to give too many tricks of the trade away either.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, get the fuck out of here if you scam somebody.
All right, Joe. Tell your wife we appreciate you, her giving you up here for the evening. We'll
absolutely.
We'll see you in person here soon. Are you going to any conference? You going to Pacific Bitcoin?
That's the plan.
All right, we'll see you there.
It materializes.
We'll see you there.
Cool.
See you, dude.
Thanks, guys. Take care.